quilty friends, and this is the last video for our Halloween quilt series. In this video we're going to talk about attaching the borders, and then you will have a completed quilt top. Just so you know, you can quilt this on your own, but if you bring it back to the Bee for long arm quilting, you would get 20% off the cost of long arming this quilt top. That's true of any quilt. When you buy all of your material here, we always give you 20% off. Anyway, first we're going to attach the orange borders, and we're going to attach all of the orange borders first on all four sides, and then we're going to attach the dark haunted house border. And you do all your orange ones and then all the haunted house ones. We're going to end the video with showing you exactly how to attach them, but you need to know you're going to do the orange borders, you're going to do the sides first, and then you're going to do the top and bottom. In your kit, you will have 4.5 strips of orange and 4.5 strips of the haunted house. The reason is your top and bottom borders are going to have to be pieced. So you're going to take that half strip and you're going to sew part of it onto the top border and part of it onto the bottom border. The reason you have to do it is because when you add the borders to the sides, now your quilt is just a little bit wider. And while one strip is enough to make it this width, it's not enough once we add the additional borders to it. The other thing you're going to notice is your haunted house fabric is directional. That means the houses are all going one way. So they're going to be going, to keep them going the same way, you need to make sure you're attaching your half strip to the top and bottom so that the houses all stay oriented the same way. Okay? So first you're going to attach your orange borders to both sides, and then you'll piece your top and bottom strips and add your orange top and bottom borders. Here is how you are going to attach your orange. The first thing you're going to do is cut off your selvages. Okay? So I'm going to do that real fast. Yeah. And you're going to make sure you get the whole selvage off. And to make sure that I'm not cutting it at an angle or anything, I'm lining up the edge of the strip with a line on my ruler. Maybe. Here, that's okay. All right, so I'm going to cut off the selvage, and I'm going to do the same thing at the other end. You don't want to get these guys caught in your quilt. They're more tightly woven than the rest of the fabric, and they will misbehave when you put them with the rest of your quilt. Okay, now that we've got our selvages off, we're going to lay the borders on here so that it's the right sides together and the fabric goes past your top quilt block here, and it goes past at the bottom. When we do it this way, whoops, still pinned. Sometimes if you line them up,
This is
in the way?
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes when you line these guys up directly, if you line them up edge to edge, if you don't stitch exactly perfectly, if something goes wrong, if it gets pulled funny, when you open it up, they can open up and be slanted or not even. Where with this method, when you start out with your orange border past the top edge of your quilt block, we're going to open it at the end, press it, and then trim it off, and then we don't have to worry that we didn't line it up exactly perfect. All right, so I'm just going to do enough here to get started. Our machine is set up for 1/4 inch piecing. You've got a 1/4 inch foot on there, and your stitch length should be at 1.8. We're using a neutral colored thread. My thread is really not cooperating. There we go. So I'm gonna just...
Are you going to backstitch?
Yes, I am gonna backstitch this time because First of all, it's a really long seam. I'm also starting a little bit, I started a little bit past where my quilt block was. I sewed onto my quilt block, and now I'm back stitching. And then forward, I just back stitched 3 stitches, and now I'm gonna stop and get myself arranged here. When you're doing long seams, it's hard. The hardest part about it, and the number one thing that causes trouble, is your quilt pulls, and then you don't end up lined up exactly, and your border ends up wonky. If you've ever had a quilt long-armed and you get it back and the edges of it are puffy, that's because your borders were actually bigger than your quilt top, and your quilt top and the long armor had to account for it somehow. So I'm just doing a little bit at a time, keeping my raw edges together. I tend to adjust to the back edge of my machine and put my finger there and then sew to my finger. Not sew over my finger. And you shouldn't be afraid to stop and adjust your quilt. This part over here. And again, we don't want anything pulling, putting stress on our seams. And we're keeping the raw edges together and exactly in line with the edge of the foot. We're almost to the end, and then we'll back stitch again. I like to back stitch when I'm putting large sections of my quilt together, because I sort of feel like the longer the seams, the more stress there is on them and the more likely they are to pull out, and then you have trouble later on when you're quilting.
Another time I back stitch is if I know it's going to be a while before I stitch across that again. Where if I know I'm going to immediately stitch across it, then I don't tend to back stitch.
You mean the same day, or you mean?
Yeah. I mean, like I'm going to do several steps before I stitch across that again, because that means I'm going to handle the quilt and it might pull out.
Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll press this as we sewed and press it open. And so you don't have to watch this entire seam because it's a long one. I'll then show you what to do. I'm just going to press this purple block.
Tangled in the cord?
Uh-huh. And once you do that, then you go to your cutting mat. Make your quilt lay nice and flat. And then you're going to, you're going to line up the edge of your ruler with the edge of your quilt top. I also try to see if I can make my seam lay on a line on your ruler. If you can, that means you're keeping it nice and square. And then you're just going to cut the top edge, and you're going to do the same thing on the bottom. Okay? And after you do that, you're going to do, again, the two sides first, and then you will sew your extra orange, half a strip, onto a strip across the top, trim that off, and then what the big piece you trim off of the top, you're going to attach to a strip for the bottom, and sew onto there, sew that onto the bottom, and then you're going to repeat the entire process with your haunted house fabric, and you will have a completed Halloween quilt. If you have any trouble at all, you can always call the shop or come in or email us, and we are here to help you. So good luck.